Hi. Let me play some music so I can take a little break. I'll be right back. I've been on Zoom since 9 o'clock this morning. Who's got it? Who's playing music for me? Someone volunteer. Jake, I put you in charge.
Okay, cool.
30 seconds. Well, maybe a minute. I'll be right back.
Yeah, I want a nap.
Like Morse code, my soul start to grow. I try to focus on the whole of where the torch goes. In the tradition of these legendary sports pros, as far as I can see, I made it to the threshold. Lord knows I waited for this a lifetime, and I'm an icon when I let my light shine. Shine bright as an example of a champion. Taking me advantage, never common out of cancel it. Learn like to carry it, learn how to carry it, master it, always above and beyond average. True to the flame that I train with and travel with. Something in my eyes say I'm so close to having it thrive. I realize I'm supposed to reach for the sky. Never let
What kind of music are we listening to? Okay. Back. I don't know what kind of music that was. Thank you very much, but thank you for covering for me.
No problem.
What were you playing?
So it's called The Fire by The Roots featuring John Legend. And recently it's kind of connected to me because it's more for giving like you have like this like fire inside you that like wants to like keep lit. So it's for just more of a motivational song to just keep me focused and just know that if I'm working hard, then I'll achieve.
Cool. That was a good song to pick. So everyone's feeling motivated. Right? Let me see your faces. Give me a thumbs up if you're motivated. The dog's barking. Good job. Thank you, Lexi, for letting me see your face. All right. I should slow down for a minute, right? You guys should tell me something good so I can slow down. What am I listening to?
Until it heals.
Something good that happened?
Yeah, someone tell me something good that happened.
Proctor Track got hacked and had a huge data leak.
Is
So
that
we
what that
got to
was?
Yeah, we got to take our super hard midterm, open notes.
Oh, wow.
And we probably all would have failed if it wasn't open notes.
That's awesome.
Speaking for myself, I don't know if everyone else can confirm that.
Push down and then all this.
So can you reach out to,
It's gonna feel so much better, and that's how you know it's healing.
what does that sound? Can you reach out to the person that hacked it and tell them thank you?
If the pus is
I
like,
shouldn't say that.
If I
On,
could, I would.
I shouldn't say that on a recording, should
that's
I?
fine, or like a light green, that's fine. But if it's like a dark green to
Okay, somebody's listening to something. It's killing my ADHD. Can you hear it?
especially if blood's coming out. But obviously blood's gonna come out at first.
Blood's gonna come out after. All right, I know who it was. Thank you. Okay, so we got the notice about Proctor Track, but I didn't know exactly what that meant. So that's impressive. It's impressive. Okay, where am I, you guys? We are in. We're going to back to Nearpod. Did anybody watch the video that I put up today? Don't you love how I send you a video 2 hours before class? Not cool. Anyone watch it? Okay, that's good to know. So let me.
Are you talking about the video from Tuesday, like the Zoom call?
Yeah,
Oh, okay. I mean, I was there, so I knew what happened.
you
so.
didn't need to watch it. Yeah. Okay. So once again, we're going to. Share my screen. Someone, but y'all making me laugh in the chat. Okay, so you see my screen. Y'all are so quiet today. I need to see your faces. I'm gonna move you over here. Okay, you guys know I like to see you. Show me your faces. Don't have to. I just like it when you do. Can you see the Nearpod code? Are you plugged in? Abby's outside. It looks really nice out there. Is it nice outside?
It's beautiful out.
Which
I'm on my porch.
It looks really nice. That's awesome. All right. Thumbs up if you're ready.
Professor, I just have one question.
Yes, ma'am.
I was taking notes earlier on the Nearpod, and so I already was like on the Nearpod. Does it say that I'm still signed in? Does it say Haley Dressel?
I have to go to the individual version to look.
Okay, just because it didn't ask me for a code, I just wanted to make sure that you could see that I was present.
That's awesome. So, yeah, that's funny. Yeah, because well, usually what I do at this point is, should I tell y'all what I do? I take a screenshot of you to know who's here. instead of using Nearpod, because in the beginning I was using the Nearpod when you logged in to know that you were here, but then that caused problems because sometimes
Oh,
it shows
okay.
you there and sometimes it doesn't show you there. So yeah, so I screenshot this little thing over here.
Okay, perfect. Thank
You're not
you.
watching. All right. Just so that I have attendance. I tried to take attendance that one time online and that was crazy, a waste of time. So that's how I'm taking attendance these days. Okay. All right, we're ready. Okay, I'm going to go back to the beginning. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. Are you dizzy yet?
We can't see the Nearpod on like the screen though, like on
No.
your screen. I see it on my iPad, but like I don't see it on the screen share. By the way,
What do you see on my screen?
just as like an empty Google.
How weird. Let me try. Oh, I'll try again. The wrong screen, of course. Now, do you? All right, let's talk about my favorite people. It would be interesting to see if I say the same things 2 weeks in a row. I always tell the same stories. So we're talking about students with emotional and behavioral disorders. That term covers students with emotional disorders. So give me an example of an emotional disorder. Lexi.
Would bipolar disorder be an emotional disorder?
Bipolar disorder would be an emotional disorder. Exactly. Tell me another one.
Schizophrenia.
Schizophrenia. Yep. So tell me a behavior disorder. There's some
I
psychology.
think
Go ahead.
there's I don't remember the name of it, but it's when I think it's called dissociative personality disorder or something. When someone has like multiple personalities. Yeah.
I would consider that more of an emotional disorder.
Okay.
But I'm not really sure where it fits, like in the DSM.
Kind of a bit of both, in my opinion, but
It would definitely be an emotional and behavioral disorder. Aaron.
Would conduct disorders fit under behavior?
Yeah. So conduct disorder would be behavior. So conduct disorders are, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, but conduct disorders are where kids demonstrate or people demonstrate kind of antisocial behaviors. So some of the characteristics are hurting animals, burning things down, committing a crime with a weapon, and the person doesn't feel remorse for doing those things. Oppositional defiant disorder, oddly enough, I don't know. They seem to be the kids that I like the most. I don't know. Maybe they remind me of me. But so someone tell me what oppositional defiant disorder is. What is ODD? I say to the people that read the chapter and have access to a computer. Mackenzie.
It can create a lot of anger or irritability in like the child and cause defiance.
Yeah, so what you see in oppositional defiant disorder is defiance, exactly. The kids that tell you, nope, not gonna do that. And I don't know, they're the kids that challenge me the most and that I like to work with the most because they're strong, right? So most of us, someone tells you to turn your camera on, what do you do? What do you do if I say, oh, guys, turn your camera on? Sabrina, what do you do?
Turn it on.
Yeah, but you have oppositional defiant, blah, blah, blah. You have oppositional defiant disorder and you don't want to turn your camera on. Then what do you say to me?
No.
No. And that's okay because a lot of times they're just standing up for themselves, right? However, sometimes it's more about being oppositional, just saying no for the sake of saying no. But again, remember one thing I've always told you, or I should have told you, is that when you see misbehavior, you can't take it personal. It is not about you. So if a kid straight up tells you no, there's a reason, even if it's because they want to feel like they have some control in that situation. There's a reason for the no, right? It has a function. So that is what emotional behavioral disorders are. So that is what they are. Okay. Talk to me about how many special ed categories there are.
There are 13, but in New Jersey there's 14.
Good job. There are 13. So someone tell me the ones we've talked about up to date. ADHD, which is typically covered, really? It's typically covered under what category?
Other health impairments.
Other health impaired, good job. So other health impaired, what else?
Learning disabilities.
Learning disabilities.
Speech and language impairments.
Speech and language impairments. Those are the three we've talked about, right? Okay. So what's the category for what we're talking about today? So I'm talking about emotional and behavioral disorders, but what does IDEIA call it? Somebody that was here Tuesday, you know this.
Is it just the emotional disturbance?
Yeah.
Or emotionally disturbed?
Yeah, it's emotionally disturbed. And we'll talk a little bit further on about why we don't like that term. So the history is that as far back as 1547, we could tell that there were people with emotional and behavioral disorders. No doubt about it, right? All you have to do is go to New York City and walk through the park, right? Or go into a classroom. And then in 1547, the first institution was formed, and that was in London. And it goes further, right? So if you read the slide, in the 1800s, the first public school opened, first public school class. But it's super important to remember that kids did not have to go to school until what year? I'm sorry. We did not have to let kids in school with disabilities until what year? The first special ed law was passed in what year?
1975.
1975, that's right. And what was it called, Erin?
EHA.
Good job. It was called the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, and it is now called da-da-da-dum. How would you feel if I randomly called your name? Would you hate that? I heard about a professor that was doing that the other day. They're like, it was a doctoral class, and they're like, she just randomly calls my name. I turned my screen off. All right, someone tell me let's do it together. The current law is unmute. Are you ready? The Individual Disabilities Education Act guarantees that children with disabilities have a right to a
free appropriate education, in the least restrictive environment.
Good job. Pat yourself on the back. Excellent. All right, you can mute yourself now. Quit paying attention. No, you have to pay attention. So, why was I talking about that? Oh, so in the original law in 97 called it a serious emotional disturbance. If you were a principal at a school in 1960 and a parent brought a kid to school, the kid comes in the building. That's funny, I'm seeing a high school student. Let's see an elementary student. He comes in and he slaps the teacher, throws the garbage can across the room and runs out. Do you have to let him stay in school? Absolutely not. Not in 1960. At that point, you're a principal. You're like, dude, take your kid home. He's got some problems, right? But the law passed and you can't send kids home anymore. So this is a tough group of kids. And this is a group that you will always advocate for because you were in my class. So in 1961, Eli Bauer developed the definition for what we use now as emotional disturbed. He didn't like it to be used the way it's used. It is though, and we'll talk a little bit about that. They did take the word serious out, so it's now just emotional disturbance, whatever that means. So what about kids with EBD? They're hard to teach and they have trouble learning. So they challenge teachers and they are challenged. When compared to their gen ed peers, they experience the least success. Does that make sense to you? That they would experience the least success in a gen ed or in an academic setting? Yeah. They have large, greater academic deficits than students with learning disabilities, which is interesting because the disability is not caused by learning problems. It's caused by behavioral problems, but yet those behavioral problems interfere with learning until to the point where the deficit is larger than those with learning disabilities. So what happens when you're grown? So let's think about a child with EBD that is oppositional, or he has a conduct disorder, or he's severely depressed, severely anxious. How's he going to do if you don't remediate those issues or address those issues? What's it going to look like as an adult when he goes to work? You can pick any of those and talk to me about it. Or as a whole is fine too.
I think maybe like in a work environment as an adult, people might find it hard to work with
a
person who's like that, and I guess develop some like implicit bias.
Probably some explicit bias, right?
Or yeah, explicit, yeah. I guess more explicit, yeah. Yeah, that's all I have to say. I don't really know.
Good. No, that's good. That's true. Lexi.
The student, now adult, would probably have issues with authority and like listening, if that makes sense, because they're used to being like punished.
Yeah.
If they grow up in that environment, so they may like not be the best worker, if that makes sense, because they're not willing to respond to authority.
That's a good point. That's a really good point, because and you're going to see that in second graders. If all you ever hear from me is how bad you are, I mean, if all you've heard from the time you were 4 years old was that you can't behave, then how are you going to act when you're in second grade? You heard it from kindergarten to second grade. What are you going to think about yourself if someone tells you you can't behave? What are you going to believe?
That you can't behave.
Thank you. That you can't behave. Exactly. And so why try? If you never get positive reinforcement, the only way you can get attention from adults is misbehavior. Then you're going to misbehave. Correct? Because you need that attention. We all need that attention. So typically our students that are emotionally and behavioral disordered have problems with employment, just like you said. They have poor interpersonal relationships, and they need mental health services. But there's so much, we talked about this a little bit before, there's so much stigma with mental health services that we've got to get rid of, right? Stigma's got to go. So this is the definition of emotional disturbance in the law. What does it say? Characteristics by exhibiting one or more of the following conditions. So there's 5. The first one is an inability to learn that cannot be explained by intellectual, sensory, or health factors. So that gets rid of the idea that the behavior is associated with learning, right? So it's not an intellectual disability, it's not a learning disability, and it's not a health issue. An inability to build or maintain satisfactory interpersonal relations with peers and teachers. So we just talked about that, right? It's those kids that are really struggling to get along. Inappropriate types of behavior or feelings. And that always freaks me out. Every time I read it, I think, how can you have an inappropriate feeling? So what do you think that means? Aren't your feelings your own? I mean, whatever I feel is what I feel, right? But if you think about someone that's struggling with severe mental illness, do their feelings fit within typical situations? No. So for example, I was talking about, let's talk about people with schizophrenia, because that's where I go when I said in the park in New York. So you see people walking around talking to themselves, for example, right? Or talking to something that you don't see. And they get angry at something you don't see. Is that an appropriate feeling? No, it's not appropriate for the situation because there's not really something there that's making them angry. I think about a parent that I knew one time. We did in-home therapy with her child, and we walked into an apartment and she had Bible scriptures written on the walls, big. It looked like in child handprint. And she explained to us, and I'm not exaggerating, she explained to us that the government was coming to take her children away. And she was not talking about Child Protective Services. It was like the FBI and all this intense stuff. So were her feelings appropriate for that situation? No. So that's what that means. A tendency to develop physical symptoms. So that's when you get sick because you're anxious or you're worried, right? But you're not really physically ill. And a general pervasive mood of unhappiness or depression. So that covers anxiety, depression. The characteristics have to be demonstrated over a long period of time. So do you get sad sometimes? Do you get depressed sometimes? Give me a head. How many of you get depressed sometimes? Yeah, I think we all do sometimes. At least we get sad, right? But if you were depressed for 6 months, then that's different. Then you need to seek help. Exactly, right? And then that would fall under an emotional behavioral disorder. It also includes schizophrenia. This is the weird part, and why we primarily don't like the definition is that it doesn't apply to a child who's socially maladjusted unless the child has been found to have an emotional disturbance. Can we just revisit that for just a moment? You can't be emotionally disturbed if you're socially maladjusted unless you're emotionally disturbed. Does that make sense? That's the goofiest definition. And on top of it, just straight up not making sense, then socially maladjusted, as they define it, doesn't make much sense either. So typically they're talking about kids with conduct disorders when they talk about socially maladjusted. Do you think that we should provide services to kids who have a conduct disorder? So in school, we have a child who is burning houses down. Should we just leave that kid in general ed? No. So I actually taught that student. It was really sad. He burned buildings down, and his mom told me that, it was so sad. His mom told me she was going to give him up. She was going to make him a ward of the state. He was in 5th grade because he was influencing his 2 younger brothers. At that point in my life, I was really young and really a strong advocate, and it made me so mad. But if you think about it, it kind of makes sense, right? I mean, so by telling you that story, I want you to, when you hear parents say things, don't immediately go and get mad. I mean, I didn't speak to the woman. I was beyond mad. The following year, he burned a shed down with an old man and an old woman in it and went to jail, to prison. So I don't know. But nonetheless, did he have a right to a special education? Definitely, right? We did everything we could to provide the services he needed. So that's the official definition. However, the National Mental Health and Special Ed Coalition came up with a new definition many years ago. I don't know the year, but it was a long time ago, where they proposed a new definition, and it hasn't shown up in the law yet. But as special educators, you are going to advocate for the law to be changed, right? You remember I said, work on this definition. So the definition they picked makes much more sense. It's a condition that includes behavior, emotional responses in school, different from age-appropriate cultural ethnic norms. So it's really cool that they included the ethnic norm component, right? Because there are behaviors that are quote unquote a norm in some societies that are not accepted in school, right? Okay. But we can't say a kid has an emotional behavioral disorder because he comes to school and demonstrate behaviors that are okay at home and that he sees his parents demonstrate. The school performance is affected adversely, which fits with all of the special ed categories, right? Has to impact your education. It's not temporary. So again, it can't be just one night. I'm so angry, I look like I'm angry all the time, or I'm so sad. It's consistently exhibited in 2 or more settings. Okay. And it's unresponsive to direct intervention, which is what we've talked about as far as, what was it called? The way to determine if a child has a learning disability other than the IQ discrepancy model. What was the other thing? Response to
intervention.
Response to intervention. So if they don't respond to the 3 tiers of intervention, then maybe they have an emotional disturbance, right? It includes schizophrenic disorders, affective disorders, anxiety disorders, and other sustained disorders of adjustment. So this is much better. What's missing from this definition that we saw in the prior definition? The definition I don't like. What term is not here?
The feelings thing.
Is that here? Ah, you're right. It's not here. Good job. That's not what I was thinking, but the condition. Yeah, that's good. It's not here. It doesn't talk about unrealistic feelings. So where is it in this definition that we pick up? Well, I guess because it says at the bottom, it includes schizophrenic disorders. Okay. What else is missing? Aaron?
The socially maladjusted clause.
Exactly. The socially maladjusted clause. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. I want you to Google socially maladjusted in New Jersey, because that's actually the 14th special ed category in New Jersey. Socially maladjusted has its own category. So Google it and tell me the definition.
You just want the definition?
Yeah.
Okay, I got it.
Okay, read it to us.
A social maladjustment is a persistent pattern of violating societal norms such as multiple acts of truancy or substance or sex abuse, and marked by a struggle with authority, low frustration threshold, impulsivity, or manipulative behaviors.
Yeah. So it's the conduct disorder thing, right? It's a little more like excessive truancy. That's interesting. Okay. Google and see if you can find the number of students in New Jersey that are carried as socially maladjusted in special ed. I don't know the Google terms for that. Percent students socially maladjusted, New Jersey schools. I don't know. See what you can find. Recently, a special ed director told me that they didn't use that category. They just called them emotionally disturbed.
I mean, I found an old New York Times article from 1978 that said there was about 500 socially maladjusted students at the time.
In New York?
No, in New Jersey.
New Jersey. Oh, that's interesting. Wow. Wonder what nothing since then?
Can't find anything right now.
I would really like to do a research study with kids in New Jersey that are called socially maladjusted. For one thing, it would be really cool to look at a longitudinal study and look at those 500 students. So how old are they now? Well, how long ago was that? 32, 52 years? Yeah, they're probably not with us now. Maybe they're in jail, but it would be fun to know, right? Or it would also be fun to look at what services they give them. Okay, let's move on. So the types of emotional and behavioral disorders, we've talked about this some. So there's externalizing behaviors, internalizing behaviors. Someone tell me what some of the externalizing behaviors are.
Hyperactivity.
Hyperactivity is externalizing, yes. What else?
Aggression.
Aggression. Keep going. I'm trying to engage you. You all look like you're asleep. Doing fast. I said that and Jasmine yawned. Unmute and tell me. Another externalizing behavior.
Delinquency.
Good, delinquency. Interesting, because that should fit under socially maladjusted, right, Haley? But then they put it here. What else?
Says the condition may exist with ADHD.
Can exist with ADHD, yeah. So it's aggressive behavior. It's that kid that throws the garbage can. That's so funny. That must be on my mind. I had a high school student that I really liked. And his favorite thing was to get mad in the, you know how big cafeterias are in school? And he would kick those big yellow trash cans across the cafeteria. So he'd make all this noise and trash would go everywhere and principals would come running. I mean, it was so much attention. He did it all the time. So I don't know, he must be on my mind. Kids that bite, that would be externalizing, right? So what about internalizing?
Anxiety and depression.
Anxiety and depression.
Having trouble socializing with other people.
Having trouble socializing, withdrawing. So you get the difference between the two. I don't like the low incidence thing on here, so kind of skip that. But that's what it is. It's typically kids are have either externalizing behaviors where they act out or internalizing behaviors where they act on themselves. So sometimes you see in this, you see self-harm, right? Kids that cut. Because it's all about yourself. You don't take it out on other people, which is sad somehow. Okay, I'm not gonna play the video. You can watch it and you probably should watch it, okay? So characteristics of students with emotional and behavioral disorders we've talked about. Poor social skills, poor relationships with others, inability to cope effectively in social settings, inappropriate expression of desires and needs, lack of social competence, delinquency, trouble with the law, tantrums. Have you ever seen a kid have a tantrum? How does it make you feel when you see a child tantruming?
Embarrassed if it's public.
Embarrassed, you're right. Embarrassed for mom. Lexi.
So I actually babysit 2 kids during the week, and today the one is almost 2, and he didn't want to put pants on.
I understand.
So we had a fight about pants, and he like was kicking and hitting, and it was just like frustrating because I was like, dude, you want to go outside? We just have to put pants on. Like, it's not that, like it's so easy. But I obviously couldn't say that, so it's just like frustrating because you're trying to communicate with them, but they're not, like they're just too in their own head about it that they can't listen.
Yeah, they're tantruming. So it looks like we're not going outside. We'll do something else, right? Calmly. So again, when the kid's tantruming, is it about you? Does it feel like it's about you? As a mother of children that tantrum, it feels like it's about you. And especially if you're in public, whoever said in public, it's so embarrassing because it looks like you can't what?
Take care of your kids.
Control your own child. You're right. Can you, yeah. Control your own children. So it's tough. Non-compliance. That's that kid, right? With oppositional defiant disorder. I am not going to do what you tell me to do. It's also teenagers and 2-year-olds. And recently it's some 20-year-olds. Aggression, depression, anxiety. So about 1% of the population is diagnosed with emotional behavioral disorder. However, we think that that is underdiagnosed, and it's probably between 3 and 6%. It's disproportionately male, and it's African American and Hispanic students are underrepresented in the category, but African American students, primarily males, are overrepresented in the category of emotional and behavioral disorders. So we talked about this gently the other day. It's hard for you guys to talk about this. But why do you think, well, it's easier to talk about the Asian version. Why do you think that Asian students are underrepresented? So what that means is that if I say there are 6%, I don't know how to do it. If there's 6% of the US or of your school district is Asian, then you should have the same percent of students, not 6%, but it should be equal to whatever percent of students who are white have emotional behavioral disorders. The same percent of students who are Asian should have emotional behavioral disorders, or should be expected to. Does that make sense? So what happens is if you don't diagnose them and they're not found to have these problems, then they don't receive services. On the other hand, it's the opposite with African American students. So it's more students than you would expect. And in fact, and that is actually a violation of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the overrepresentation. So districts actually get hit or punished or looked at if they have overrepresentation of African American males in any special ed category. But this is a category where it really jumps out. Why do you think that is? Either you can do either the underrepresentation or the overrepresentation.
Well, for underrepresentation, I guess you could say like parents are less likely to sort of want to diagnose or want to go out to like to the doctors or something, just because of the stigma surrounding it.
Because of the stigma, yes. So there are a lot of cultures that are super, well, first of all, we're all super sensitive to the stigma with emotional behavioral disorders, right? With mental health disorders. But there are some cultures that are more like, no, that's not a thing. Okay, so there's that. What else?
I feel like for the overrepresentation, it could kind of be that stereotype that aggressive behavior, like if they just act once like aggressively, then it's like, oh, you label it as an emotional disorder instead of actually thinking about them just acting like kids.
Check. It's bias, you guys. It's straight up bias. It's explicit, it's implicit, it's yeah. And that's what it is. So your job as future teachers is to not jump on that. When you think, oh, he's got an emotional behavior disorder, he just punched him. I know his mama walks around punching people and blah, blah, blah. You're not going to jump on that. You're not going to refer. You're going to think. You're going to slow down and you're going to reflect on your own self. What are you thinking? Where is it coming from? Right? Because in a majority of cases, referrals start with teachers in classrooms. So what if you have a student who comes from a culture? Okay, talk to me about cultures where it's okay to be really loud and people talk over each other.
Politics.
Politics. Oh my God. We could look at the debate. Never mind.
I think in some Hispanic cultures.
Thank you for rescuing me. Yes, some Hispanic cultures.
Yeah.
I always think Italian. I always think about big Italian families where they talk all over each other and they're so happy. So what about that kid, that 5-year-old where everyone talks all the time and he comes to school and he's so happy and he's talking over everyone and he gets shot down because in school you have to sit down and be quiet. And he keeps doing it because that's what we do at home. And all of a sudden he has ADHD. Right? All of a sudden you jumped on that. He has ADHD. Or Tuesday, I told the story of, and I won't tell the story again, but I can't think of the culture. So let's talk about country towns. What culture would that be? It would be country culture. I don't know. Small towns.
Like very blue collar.
Thank you. Very blue collar. Thank you, Lexi. Because all I can think is Texas, and that's not fair. But very blue collar, very small, about standing up for yourself, right? So that's the culture. They fight. They physically fight in some cultures. And that's because they're standing up for themselves. They're not letting people, quote unquote, run over them. But then they come to school, and is it okay to punch somebody when you're angry? That's not going to work, right? And so, but it doesn't make sense culturally. But you can't say it's an emotional and behavioral disorder if it's okay at home and we're trying to make them fit into a different norm, right? We're all on board with that one. Okay. So we don't really know what causes emotional and behavioral disorders. There are some ideas. We know that some mental health issues are genetic, or we think they are. We know some of the situations I just described to you where misbehavior occurs because of what's accepted at home or in the community. But for it to be an emotional behavioral disorder, it would tend to be more like trauma oriented. So kids who are traumatized bring behaviors to school, right? Can school make you emotionally and behaviorally disordered? Can school make you anxious? Yeah. Can COVID make you anxious? It's going to be really interesting to see the number of people that sought out mental health assistance with depression, anxiety during this time, right? Yeah. So school can do it too. I taught a teacher that taught in a very wealthy school district in New Jersey. I won't tell you which one, but where a majority of the parents were professors. And he talked about the level of anxiety and depression in that school like it was like crazy because of the expectations that were placed on students, right? So yes, school can cause it. Prevention, I'm going to skip medical management because that's more, I don't know. It doesn't have anything to do with schools. But what we should do is reduce overrepresentation. We need to be super careful about overrepresenting children from different cultures in special ed. Positive behavior supports in schools help eliminate the diagnosis and functional behavioral assessments, both of which we'll talk about. So what works? How do we teach kids in a classroom that have emotional and behavioral disorders? First of all, the first thing you're going to do when you walk into a classroom is you're going to develop a behavior management system. And you're going to make sure that the kids in your classroom know the rules. They know the routines. So can you tell me one routine that you remember from school as far as turning your work in? Did you have a teacher that had a routine for turning your work in? Not me, because I struggle with that. Another teacher.
I've had teachers, I've had teachers before that, like in high school, that would have like a stack of bins for each class period. And sometimes they would ask us to, like, if we had homework due the next day, they would ask us to turn in the homework before the end of class time in those bins. And that was one system I've experienced.
Good. Anyone else?
When I was in middle school, a lot of my teachers just had along with like the bathroom pass or whatever, at a desk near the door, they also had a homework bin where as soon as you walked into class, you put your homework in the bin before going to your seat.
Exactly. So David's talking about restroom passes. That's a huge routine. How do you go to the restroom? How do I go to the restroom without raising my hand, interrupting everybody, having a tantrum, right? Where do I turn my work in is huge. Those are things that cause problem behaviors. But if you have a routine and the kids really know the expectation, then it helps. Point systems, I love. So I'm trying to think. It's interesting because we usually think about elementary schools. So tell me about a point system. It probably wasn't a point system. For example, where students earned classroom bucks and they got to turn them in, or the color charts. Tell me some of those things you remember or you've seen.
I had a reward system in 5th grade. It was where when we completed like extra credit or other assignments, we would get like a ticket, and then we can convert it into like a homework pass.
Good job. That's called the token economy, and it's so good. It's really super effective. I wrote a study about. We looked at all the literature to see if it was effective, and it is. What happens when you get in high school?
No one gives you credit for doing anything special.
Exactly. Is that okay? No, you guys. I mean, as an adult, do you want someone to tell you that you're doing a good job? Yeah. Do you reinforce yourself? Do you ever give yourself something? If I finish this, I'll get a 5-minute break, or I can go outside or something. Yeah, you kind of have to learn to reinforce yourself. But regardless of what age you're going to teach, those things are super important. How do I reinforce high school kids? So give me some ideas about how to provide reinforcement to a middle school or high school student. What do they like? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, go ahead. It's okay.
Erin.
Homework passes. Those were my favorite things in high school, because if I was busy, then I could just use that to cover homework for a day.
Exactly. Jasmine.
In my English class in my junior year of high school, my teacher had she gave out like money if you like said something really interesting in class, and it would be like extra credit on I think it was on tests. But honestly, she didn't really do it that much. Like, she said she was going to, and then I don't know. I don't remember her ever giving out like money to my class. I know she did for her other classes, but yeah, that's something.
Yeah. So were you in an honors class?
Yeah, it was honors world literature.
So let's talk about that. So I bet she gave the money out to not honors classes. Why do you
Possibly.
So you guys talk to me about what you think that means. What is the implication there?
Because honor students are already like super motivated for the most part, and kids in like the regular classes, like the CPE classes, like don't have to be as motivated because that's just like the normal level of class, and so you want to give those incentives to those kids so that they say something insightful or actually participate or do something.
They wake up. So you have to think about that when you're teaching. So what happens when we use token economy systems, we tend to either only give the money, the reinforcer, to kids that behave anyway, always, or we tend to not give it to them and kind of give it to kids in the middle. So the kids that get left out are the kids who are always achieving and the kids who are really tough to catch doing something good. And they're probably the ones that need it the most, right? I mean, across the board, everyone needs that reinforcer. So think about that when you're giving out reinforcements. A systematic intervention plan. So kids with emotional and behavioral disorders have a behavior intervention plan in their IEP that you'll follow. Yeah, we'll say more about that in a minute. A hierarchy of tactics is like, what do I do first? It's kind of like first, second, third, but I don't like to talk about negative consequences as much as I like to talk about positive consequences, because positive consequences are more likely to increase positive behavior than negative consequences. Make sense? So what are my hierarchy of tactics? So first, and maybe it goes the other way. I mean, typically you think of negative. So first I'm going to give you a warning, and then I'm going to do whatever, give you 10 times as much homework. I don't know. But if you think positive, so what if I give a positive? Maybe it's verbal, and then the next time it's $1 or something. The reinforcement that works best is intermittent So just like if you're playing a slot machine, if I go gambling and I put a quarter in, is it going to hit in a pattern? Like, do I know I'm going to put 3 quarters in and on the 4th one I'm going to hit? No. It's intermittent, which makes you do what? So I put a quarter in, except you don't really put a quarter in anymore because I'm old. But back in the day, we used to put quarters in. So I put a quarter in the slot machine, then I put a second quarter and it hits. So what am I going to do? Am I going to take my money and run? No, why? Why am I not going to take my money and run?
You want the reward again, so you want to keep going.
Yeah. So I'm going to put some more quarters in, right? Which is what kids do, especially if they don't know when it's going to happen. If you have a child with severe behaviors, you make sure they know when it's going to happen. But once the behaviors start getting better, then they work harder, or maybe they don't know exactly when it's going to happen. Homeschool communication, this is big. You want to communicate with your parents, with your kids' parents, regardless of what grade you teach, and whether or not they're behaving. So as a child, as a parent of 1 million children with ADHD, that's how it feels sometimes. Do you think I got a lot of positive notes home for my boys? Nah. So if I knew, I looked down at my phone and, well, actually I didn't have a cell phone, yeah. And a teacher was calling, do you think I was excited to talk to her? No. But what if we change that around? What if it becomes you call home when things are good? Then that helps the kid and the parent, right? That's another thing you've got to remember to do. As many positives as negatives. In fact, when it's verbal positives, it's 4 positives to 1 negative. When it's phone calls, it should be, I don't know, more than that. Call and say when things happen good and watch for something good to happen other than somebody mowing the grass outside my window. Watch for positive things to happen and reinforce it, right? Classroom structure, we just talked about. Free periods have to be supervised and consistent standards across the board. So how do we determine if a child has an emotional behavioral disorder? Well, you won't make that decision. That decision will be made by a school psychologist. So you're totally off the hook for that one. And typically they're going to interview the kid, use some rating scales. Can you hear me? They are literally mowing the grass. Teachers will fill out rating scales. You know what a rating scale is? I don't think I say scale right. So it says, we see them a lot for ADHD. So it will say something like, the student fidgets a lot. Rate from 1 to 5. So on 1, that statement is not true, and 5, it's very true. They will, so the psychologist talks to the parents, talks to teachers, either through rating scales or through interviews, talks to the student, does some tests, or they use response to intervention like we talked about earlier. If the kid doesn't respond on the behavior intervention side of the triangle. Yeah. So early intervention is super important. That being said, I can tell you the risk factors, but I want you to think about a 4-year-old. Okay? Think about a 4-year-old. So they have overt and covert, they engage in overt and covert antisocial activities. So tell me one antisocial activity. We talked about it. Antisocial activity. Not responding.
Burning houses.
Burning houses. Good job, Emily. Burning houses down. So how many 4-year-olds burn houses down? Nope. So you don't have to worry about that one too. They probably do accidentally. They have problems across the setting. Okay, wait a minute. They're overly active and inattentive. 4-year-olds? Yeah. how many out of 10? How many out of 10 4-year-olds would be overly active? Guess.
All 10?
Probably 10. Yeah. When I see kids that are not overly active, I think they're not very smart. Want to talk about implicit biases? That's so wrong. It's true. My daughter-in-law's sister has 3 little girls that sit perfectly still for extended periods of time. The first time I saw them, I thought, oh my gosh, something's wrong. Yeah, I was so wrong. They're doing great in school. They're brilliant. But a lot of little kids are overly active. Frequent extreme aggression. 4-year-olds? Maybe. Those are signals of risk. So if you see any of those behaviors, then you want to intervene early and you want to start talking to people, right? All right. Before we have a video, this is the last slide. Nope. All right, we're gonna have a video first. I wanted a breakout room. Hey, so let me tell you.
Hi.
I love this new word. In special ed, we're famous for words, right? IEPs, Behavior Support Plan is a BSP, IDEIA, FBA, right? So now there's this new word. It's my favorite, neurodiversity. What is neurodiversity? I really like it. Break it down.
People thinking differently.
Yeah. So instead of saying you have an emotional behavioral disorder, or instead of saying you have ADHD, I'm going to say you're neurodiverse. You like that? I like it. All right, let's see what he says. So I am neurodiverse.
Hi, I'm Dr. Thomas Armstrong, and I'd like to
Can you hear Dr. Tomlin, whatever his name is, Armstrong?
talk with you about a concept that promises to transform the way that we look at and help students with social and emotional disorders. That concept is neurodiversity. Neurodiversity suggests that we honor and celebrate the diversity of brains among our students in the same way that we honor and celebrate biodiversity and cultural diversity. We don't look at a calla lily and say that it has petal deficit disorder. We honor it for the flower that it is. We don't say of someone who has a skin color that's different from our own that they have a pigmentation disorder.
Can I say that I have mixed emotions about how I feel about neurodiversity and his perspective, right? Nonetheless, let's listen to him because we like the term.
Disorder. That would be obviously and clearly racist. Similarly, we ought not to be pathologizing and medicalizing individuals who have different ways of thinking, learning, and behavior than typically developing individuals. So this concept of neurodiversity can be really valuable in understanding individuals with emotional and behavioral disorders. In this video.
So wait a minute. We're gonna think about it differently, right? But he just said emotional and behavioral disorders, correct?
Video, what I'd like to do is share some strategies and tools that you can use that tap these strengths that can help these individuals become more successful in school and life. The first strategy I'd like to suggest, and the most important one, is to find out as much as you can about the strengths, talents, abilities, and interests of students with social, emotional, and behavioral disorders. In fact, what these students often need more than anybody else is someone in their life who sees the best in them and who can draw out the best in them as they struggle with their emotional and behavioral difficulties. So there actually is some important research suggesting that individuals with emotional and behavioral disorders have gifts. Studies have been done, for example, that have looked at artists, writers, and musicians, and a large percentage of them, in fact, did suffer historically from some form of emotional distress or mental illness. A book was written not too long ago by a psychiatrist, Kay Redfield Jamison, called Touched with Fire, where she explored many of those connections between creativity and bipolar disorder, for example. More recently, a study at Stanford University has suggested that children with bipolar disorder, what used to be called manic depressive illness, scored higher on a creativity test than typically developing or quote unquote normal kids. So there's evidence out there suggesting that these individuals with emotional and behavioral disorders, not all of them, but some of them, are in fact highly creative and affiliated particularly toward the arts. Now, using some learning strategies that are based upon those strengths could include, for example, the expressive arts. I think the expressive art should be used more with all students, but in particular with students who struggle with self-esteem issues and who have creative strengths.
So my band people, do you ever think that, do you ever see creativity in band? Do you see kids that you think have some emotional or behavioral disorders? Yes or no?
There was somebody that I think had a cognitive disorder in my sophomore year band class.
Yeah. It's interesting. I can see it being a huge intervention or help for students to be involved in band or art, those kinds of things.
And potentials. So for example, after a student has read a novel, they should be able to paint a picture of it to express their feelings. Or in learning a math concept, they should be able to choreograph a dance. I've heard about a student who in fact took the table of periodic elements in high school chemistry and orchestrated a dance around it. We ought to be using more of those innovative tools with kids who have social and emotional difficulties. We also ought to be empowering them with self-help strategies. For example, teaching them how to notice when they're feeling upset, how to de-stress themselves using relaxation, using breathing techniques, using yoga approaches and so forth and so on, meditation. We ought to be providing them with an opportunity at any point during the school day when they're feeling out of control to go to a place, either the classroom or somewhere in the school, where they can relax, where they can calm themselves, where they can regain control, a kind of a chill out center. So these are some strategies that can be useful for students with emotional and behavioral disorders. Now there's some assistive technology tools that can also be very helpful. I think that videotape and photographs can be very useful. Cameras can be very useful with these students. First of all, by giving them these technologies and having them document various parts of the curriculum, go out and interview people, do documentaries as a way of learning content in the curriculum, taking pictures and creating photo essays. But I also think that we as educators can use these technologies to help those students with their behavioral difficulties. I once had a student in my special education classroom who was always throwing tantrums and falling on the floor and flailing about. One day I took a photograph of him during that tantrum, and later on, after he cooled off, I showed him the picture. He never threw a tantrum after that. This gave him a vivid sense of how he was coming across to the classroom. And he realized for the first time that that was what it looked like. And he didn't want to put that out to his classmates. And so he never did it again. We ought to be taking videotapes of our students, both when they're doing something really well and also when they're having difficulty. And we ought to be sitting down with them and watching these videotapes and interacting with the student about how they feel when they see themselves acting out or when they see themselves obeying the rules. And making decisions, making informed decisions about how they want to choose to live their lives and behave and conduct themselves in the school environment. Now, I also think we should be thinking about positive careers for these individuals. There's research out there saying that students with social and emotional difficulties may have more difficulty than people with other disability or diversity categories in finding gainful employment. Yep. One area that we could explore is the entertainment industry and the arts, because as we saw earlier, the research suggests that many of these kids are highly creative. Of course, not everybody can do this, and so we ought to be thinking of other careers. I think self-employment may be one possibility, which eliminates the possibility of there being a lot of conflict and friction with an authority figure, a boss, a manager. We also ought to be helping these students form their own career and vocational choices. We ought to be at the high school level, for example, providing them with internships and apprenticeships and opportunities to do job shadowing and other practical experiences so that they can see what works for them and what doesn't, and begin to form a sense of self-determination in terms of how they want to live their lives and what kind of roles they see for themselves, positive roles that they see for themselves out in the world. And for that very same reason, we also ought to be putting out there for them positive role models, people like themselves who had emotional or behavioral disorders, but who managed to minimize their difficulties and maximize their strengths to make the most of what they had. And many of these individuals, in fact, these positive role models are familiar to us all. Many artists, writers, and musicians, artists like Jackson Pollock, writers like William Faulkner, musicians like Robert Schumann struggled with mental illness. Another really interesting fact is that in one study that was done, it was found that nearly half of all US presidents between 1789 and 1974 suffered from some form of emotional disorder. Lincoln, for example, had depression. Theodore Roosevelt also struggled with emotional distress. Another example is
I gotta say, can you think of somebody more recent?
the British leader Winston Churchill, who as a child had a conduct disorder and struggled with his behavior. Finally, another example would be J.K. Rowling.
Okay, wait, let's talk about conduct disorder. So in the law, it says that if you're socially maladjusted, you can't be emotionally disturbed, right? So we're not going to give you services. Primarily saying that this kid is antisocial and a criminal and we can't help him, right? But what did he just say? Were you listening? You were asleep. I knew you were asleep. That's okay, I was looking at my phone.
I was gonna just make a point that he like kind of not justified, but he gave examples of those who created the law that require help from that law, but are against others that struggle with the same situation.
Good point. Good point.
As a child, had a conduct depression. Theodore Roosevelt also struggled with emotional distress. Another example is the British leader Winston Churchill, who as a child had a conduct disorder and struggled with his behavior. Finally, another example would be J.K. Rowling, the writer of the Harry Potter series, who herself struggled with depression during her life. So we ought to be putting these positive role models out there so that that child can see and say to themselves, you know, if these people can do it, so can I.
I agree.
I hope that these strategies and tools have been helpful to you. If you want to learn more about these strategies and tools, or get other strategies and tools, or learn more about the research on the strengths of people with emotional and behavioral disorders, get my book, Neurodiversity in the Classroom. Strength-based strategies to help students with special needs achieve success in school.
He sold me. So we always talk about, when people talk about strengths-based or ability-based, we always think about they don't give you ideas of how to address the issue. So if I don't believe that a deficit is a deficit, then I'm not going to try to intervene, right? So if you have ADHD and I think that you are neurodiverse and you're very creative and you have all these strengths, does that mean I don't have to teach you how to organize your binder? No. They go hand in hand, right? If you focus, this reminds me of when I taught middle school emotional and behavioral disturbed children. I said disturbed. They were primarily socially maladjusted. And I found out really early that I had to have a really strong relationship with them in order to get anything positive done, because they had to trust me, right? And a majority of them had lived through tons of trauma and didn't trust anyone. So there was one student that took me forever to win his heart over because I could not find anything positive to reinforce. finally, one day he looked at me and he had these big brown eyes. And I said, "You have the most beautiful brown eyes." And that's where it started. And then things started getting a little bit better. But I had to catch everything he did positive. Every attitude, every time he chose to not speak back, when I would see him catch himself, right? I would reinforce that. But you have to start with the strengths. Does that make sense? So I agree with what he's saying, except I don't like him telling us to buy his book, but I might. All right, we have about 5 minutes left. I want to go over this. You guys want to go into breakout rooms? I can tell you're tired. If we're in a classroom, I would probably let you go now. You quit talking to me. You faded out.
If we have a discussion, instead of just going to breakout rooms, why don't we just do like a little thing right here?
Right here, okay. I like to send you to breakout rooms because you'll have to talk to each other. So let's do, what am I doing? I'm going back to breakout rooms. Okay, and then we'll stop here and I'll finish the rest Tuesday. Is that fair? The rest is pretty important. So maybe I'll just record myself doing it and post it. Would you watch it if I record it? I don't know. We'll talk about it. Okay. Tell me how you feel about teaching kids who are going to bite, kick, throw things, be depressed, hurt themselves. How do you feel about teaching those kids?
I mean, for me, I would kind of feel overwhelmed. Not in like a bad way, but just like you're responsible for like trying to lessen the issues and lessen the severity of it. And that coupled with trying to educate them would just be a lot. So I don't know, it would just be like overwhelming.
Yep, I agree. So it's overwhelming. What else?
I was gonna say it's like a lot of responsibility too, because like if these kids are prone to hurting themselves or hurting each other or potentially you, I mean, that's a liability in and of itself. And also it might be like frustrating and defeating. So you have to take it day by day and try not to like think too much into it and not blame them or yourself.
There you go. It is frustrating and defeating, but it's probably the most rewarding thing I ever did. But I look back on it and I mean, cry every day, driving home. When I moved to the middle school, I told you that, every day for about 2 months probably. But when their behavior started changing and I could see that I was making a difference, it was so much better than other situations I had taught in.
For me, it wouldn't be more as not really trying to think of it as a challenge, but more of an opportunity to have a child that could be different from other kids in the classroom. And especially if you find something that ends up working long-term for the school year and you get to look back and see that you made an impact on that child, then it's also rewarding in that aspect.
That's excellent. That is excellent. You have the opportunity to make a huge difference. What we know about kids with behavior disorders or kids that are even at risk of anything is that one adult in their life, if they have one adult in their life that believes in them, then they can do better. It's resiliency. But you're right. You have to figure out it is scary. And it is a bit frightening. And there is you feel like there's a huge liability, but it's really the school's liability, not yours, as long as you follow the IEP. And you have procedures in place. One of my students that was one of my research assistants years ago, I can't believe I can say that, it was probably 5 years ago, now works in a classroom for students with emotional and behavioral disorders. And he's really good. But he just had the personality going into it, kind of like what you said, it was an opportunity. But I think that everyone is going to meet at least one of these children in your life. So you have to start thinking about what does that look like and what are you going to do and how are you going to make sure you're trained? So that's the big issue, is read and think and learn. Who else? Emily.
I mean, for me personally, I don't know how many other people can say it, but coming from somebody who is diagnosed with an emotional disturbance, I kind of feel like I can understand where they're coming from, and it's not just, oh, why is he bad? It's okay, well, he's acting up today because of whatever is going on today, or for how long.
Exactly. Yeah. It helps. I've often said that those of us with some of the similar experiences that they have do better with them than people that have never had challenges. On the other hand, I don't think there are people that have never had challenges. I think we all have some kind of challenge. It's whether we can tap into it and relate or not. Jasmine.
I mean, personally, I think that managing a classroom in general is challenging. That's like what I've heard from like high school, middle school, and elementary school teachers. I don't really know about college. I think sometimes it can, but the students are older, so usually the behaviors are more like, I guess you can say, tame. But obviously I don't really know for sure. I'm just guessing here. But I think that teaching students with EBDs, I guess, is just a different kind of challenge in a way. But that's how I would see it. Obviously, there's anything can be difficult when it comes to teaching like young students, but
way to look at it too.
Yeah, I just think it's like a different kind of challenge.
Definitely a different kind of challenge.
Yeah.
The other thing that you should remember is to use logic. It's so funny because you guys aren't going to remember anything I said, but it's videoed. So if you get in an emotionally behavioral disorder class, then you can look at my video. But one of my favorite stories is we had this little boy that had been in foster care more than he'd been out. They were brothers. They brought them out of foster care and put him back in the home with mom and dad, who were super abusive. So one brother, I don't know, their behaviors were so different. One was probably antisocial. The other was just straight up defiant. So the antisocial one was sneakier. Does that make sense? And teachers liked him more, so he knew how to suck up to you and make you love him while he was doing crazy things. The other one was just straight up in your face. I'm not going to do that. So there was this teacher that was afraid of him. She was an aide, I think. And they called me in to observe. So she had been stabbed. He stabbed her. So she was sitting beside him and I can't do this. I need to be face to face. And her hand was on the table like this. And he stabbed her with a pencil right here between her thumb and her forefinger, right? This whole bam thing. So I went in to work with her because at this point she's scared. Because once you get hurt, you kind of get scared. And I went in to work with her. And I was sitting there and his behavior starts escalating. So you can see it. He's going to get angry. You see it's going on. And her hand's on the table beside him like this. Okay, you guys. So I just got stabbed here. I have a Band-Aid here. This dude's fixing to go off. He's got a pencil in his hand. What are you doing with your hands? Where are your hands? Up, down, under your legs? Are they laying on the table beside him where he's going to stab you again? Because that was so reinforcing. No. So don't get wrapped up in lack of common sense. I moved her hand. I was like, let's put your hand down here. I mean, really? Let's think, right? And then you get teachers that come back and say, well, I shouldn't have to move my hand. Well, that's a choice you have if you like to be stabbed with a pencil, right? I mean, so there's a lot of common sense that plays into it. I thought of something else. I don't know what it was. Anyway, so it's about being careful. And it's about learning. So you're careful for yourself. You're careful for the kids and the peers. Yeah. Makes sense? All right. So Tuesday we will finish with the next part of the slide, or Thursday. That doesn't mean you don't have to start the next week's work. So you're going to start the next week's work as soon as I post it. Don't you love the way I tell you have to have things done on time and then I put things up late? Sorry. Sunday night it will be up. Okay. Questions?
Professor, so do we also have the exam for next week?
Good point. That's perfect, because actually what we're doing next week is review.
So we're not having the exam next week?
Yes, we're having the exam next week. Oh, Yeah, so I don't know. I'm stuck. I will, I don't know. What is I don't want to change the exam day. Okay. This is my favorite part of this chapter too. I will video record the rest of this chapter by myself in this room. How boring is that? And post it for you. You need to watch it because it will be on the exam.
And then, so are you going to host a review Tuesday or Thursday next week, or?
Tuesday we'll do the review. The exam's on Thursday, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So now
Well, as long as you just open it for the 22nd and not the 23rd, because that's when what we discussed last class.
Open it for, yeah. Yep. Somebody's gonna have to remind me to do that. Open it the 22nd. Put it on the calendar, and I will do the review Tuesday. Is that okay with everyone? Because it will also be taped. It'll be videotaped. So if you can't be there Tuesday, you can watch the exam. The other thing is that I use Kahoot to review. And so that will be all that's on there for next week is just the Kahoot. I think you can I can make it independent, right? Where we're not, yeah, okay. So next week, the only thing that you will see is Kahoot. So there won't be any other work other than studying. There's also the Quizlet. Do you remember the Quizlet for the laws or something that we had a couple modules ago? Do you remember? I need to repost that. Don't like to teach this class online. Are we having a good time online? Yeah, so much more fun in person. So I will repost the Quizlet. I will post the Kahoot. And then I guess I'll have to create a new Kahoot to play on Tuesday. Otherwise, you'll just have the answers memorized, and that'll be super boring. Yeah, that's what we'll do. So I'll post the Kahoot that is in existence. I'll post the Quizlet. That will be your module. And then we'll have the test on the 22nd. I'll open it through the 23rd.
So we're not having class on the 22nd? Sorry, I'm just lost.
We are. I'm sorry. We are having class. We will do a Kahoot on, wait a minute.
Yeah, now everything's.
Yeah, I'm confused. Because I thought the review was on Thursday, and then now it's on Tuesday, but what are we doing on Thursday?
Okay. Let me back up. Can I erase this part for the people that are out there? So I need a calendar. 22nd is Thursday?
Yes.
Okay. So what day is Tuesday?
20th.
Okay. So the 20th is Tuesday. We're going to review. Okay. You're right. We don't need to have class on Thursday. So on the 22nd, I'm going to open the exam. We do not have class. And it will be open until midnight on the 23rd. Clear as mud? It really is clear this time, right? I know what I'm doing. What time will the exam open, Christina? Christina, honey? By noon. By noon on the 22nd, the exam will be open and it will close at midnight on the 23rd. Tuesday, we will review, and the weekly module will have the Quizlet and the Kahoot. Right? All right. I wrote it down. I'm going to mess this up. As soon as I do something wrong, email me quick so I can fix it. I think I got it though. All right. Questions? Thoughts? All right. I will see you guys Tuesday or the following Tuesday. I will talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.